Hello everyone, this is Patrick Robinson. I am proud to serve as the president of Research College of Nursing, and thank you for joining us today in this, our continuing series called Voices of Our Community. This series highlights community leaders who are making a real impact in the Kansas City community through acts of social justice. And I'm so pleased today to have my guest, Ryan Hudnall. Ryan is the Executive Director of Della Lamb Community Services, and he'll tell you a little bit about that. Ryan and I are going to focus today, though, on the work that Della Lamb does in terms of the refugee community. It's going to be a fascinating discussion. So welcome, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My delight, truly. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, it's been my delight to get to know you in the pre-interview, and I'm really... what you do is just amazing.
And you. And I think these conversations are so important. As a resettlement agency, as I reflect upon the experience of our clients, they're so disconnected to so many of our community stakeholders and community institutions. And so we serve in the gap here to connect. And so I'm so excited to connect and just reflect and dream about the possibilities for our city and how we serve our newest neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people know the term refugee, but don't actually even know what it means.
Yeah.
You know? Well, first of all, tell us what Della Lamb Community Services is. So start with the breadth of what the organization does.
So, when people come across Della Lamb Community Services, they have to say, what is a Della Lamb?
I know.
But rather the question is, who is Della Lamb? And so our organization started as just a humble expression of trying to meet the needs of our neighbors, beginning in 1897. So it was a member of members of the Melrose Methodist Church saw that their neighbors, who were primarily from Italy and were working mothers, were struggling to identify solutions for childcare. And because of that, there was barriers to employment, which was leading to heavily impoverished situations. And so these courageous women, through community and relationships, said, we can do something. So they established one of the very first daycares in all of Kansas City and served in that capacity for a number of years. It emerged that this was something much larger than just this one small expression of care, that our neighbors needed so much access and support from community and relationship that they broke off from the church and formed a separate nonprofit organization, still heavily connected with not just one Methodist church, but so many churches across Kansas City, that was all in response to the needs of vulnerable neighbors. And so from our beginning, 1897, our heartbeat has been for our littlest learners and our vulnerable neighbors. And so Della Lamb was our first board president, beginning in 1906, when they identified the need to establish a separate nonprofit style organization. And she served in that capacity to 1933. So I think about Della Lamb, and during the pandemic for myself, she was a great source of inspiration and courage. Della Lamb served before the Model T was out. She was our board president prior to the passage of the 19th Amendment. She served during the World War I era, the 1919 Spanish flu pandemic, the Jazz Age, the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression. And so she is someone who overcame adversity. And as we think about who we are as an organization and what our clients are enduring, whether our littlest learners, our refugee clients, so we have a fundamental belief that through relationship, through community, we can overcome adversity.
What an amazing foundress.
Yeah, she's phenomenal. And she invited so many to join her in this cause. And that's where the real giftedness of this lies. The real fruit is through relationship. And it's not just the relationship of those who are volunteering, but it's the relationship with those who are receiving, because they're contributing too. They're enriching our lives and our city through their presence. And so we are mutually benefiting through this act of working together to dream about the possibilities for each other's lives. So today, that expression, that heartbeat of how we work with our littlest learners or refugees or immigrants, it's emerged into our 4 core services, which is refugee resettlement, which will be kind of our focus point today. Early education, we're a licensed and accredited early education provider. youth services, so we provide enrichment activities and mentorship opportunities for youth, primarily in the historic Northeast, but we do draw people from across Kansas City. And then social services, which is emergency assistance, some seasonal programming over the holidays, and other ways to stabilize families in moments of crisis.
And the historic Northeast, you said.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that neighborhood for people who don't know?
Yeah, you think Northeast, and it's you might think be more so what our metropolitan area is today as opposed to what it was in the early 1900s. Mm-hmm. The historic Northeast is literally right off the northeast part of what is now the downtown area. So along Independence Avenue, going east, you'll have the historic Northeast, which has always been, well, not always, originally was some of the pockets of wealth in our city. So you'll see some of these gorgeous, beautiful old homes. But today what we see is this rich tapestry of people groups across Latin America, but from across the globe now. And it's like, if you want to meet the globe, come to the historic Northeast. You're going to see so many different languages, so much food opportunity. It's a really vibrant and rich part of our city.
Wow, and that's where the actual center is located.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Del Lam is located in the historic Northeast.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk a little bit about you before we get started, because I think your story is very interesting. So tell us what brought you to this work and trace the steps that got you to here.
It's kind.
Because it's kind of a cool story, I would say.
It's not particularly traditional.
It is not.
Just I love people, and your expression for love of people can find its avenue wherever you're at. But particularly as I emerged after college, and I attended Truman State University in Kirksville, Missouri, I joined a public accounting firm, KPMG, which had a very robust presence here.
That's a big one.
It's a big one.
Mm-hmm. Lots of opportunities for
opportunities.
future growth in your career.
And part of the attraction to the auditing practice, so I was a certified public accountant in the audit practice at KPMG for 7 years. And it was just the sense of, how do we understand organizations? How do we ask good questions? How do we reflect upon how all the different pieces of an organization fit together? And this is where my accountant nerd comes out, and because I'll always express the numbers will tell the story. But if you look underneath the numbers are a manifestation of the operations. And so if we truly understand the numbers, we are directly encountering the operations. So it's simply a way to reflect upon organizational health and work with teams to do that. But KPMG offered this just incredibly unique opportunity where I was allowed to take a sabbatical nearly every year I was at KPMG, mm-hmm. which emerged as just a time to sit and reflect and travel and encounter the incredible beauty of humanity all across the globe. And so this took me to places such as Brazil, Chile, Latin America, including Belize and Nicaragua, to Kenya for a month, to Europe, and everywhere you go, you're just seeing this incredible beauty of humanity. This culminated into a new request. So I connected with my partners there and I said, this month-long sabbatical, I am just overwhelmingly blessed that you would even do this. But how about a 6-month sabbatical? And it was, at that time, we reflected, looked at our client responsibilities, and for whatever reason, they said yes. So I spent 6 months in the country of Haiti during 2014, and just really formed so many relationships. Went down with another local nonprofit called the Global Orphan Project, and which is rooted in the idea of how do we tap into the giftedness of Haitians in order to care and understand the environment we're in and care for the people that are there. And it was evolving in its understanding of orphan care, understanding that it's a much more complex term than we imagined, that orphan prevention, economic empowerment, these are key aspects of addressing some of the root challenges. And of course, I just got to meet and become friends with so many Haitians. And it really, at that time, I just felt deeply in my spirit that my life was headed on a different trajectory. And so following that sabbatical, I joined the Global Orphan Project just to reflect upon the state of international and domestic child welfare. That took me to Haiti a number of different times, to India, to Lebanon, to the Dominican Republic. And it was in Lebanon where I felt deeply just as if a voice in the wind just crept into my spirit and permeated my soul and gave me a deep appreciation and interest in the refugees of Kansas City. You see, Lebanon is one of the primary receivers of refugees across the globe, stemming from, in the 70s, it was the Palestinian crisis, and in the 2010s, it was the Syrian civil war. And so Lebanon is a country that has been on the front lines of receiving refugees. And while I was there, I was meeting with community stakeholders who were giving their life away for those who were having trouble with their legal status, who were not given the right to work, but the beauty of their humanity was ever before us. And it was in those moments where I just encountered the incredible dichotomy of our world, both these first-class accommodations and the beauty of Lebanon, to the suffering that was existing, but the humanity also.
Coexisting in the same location.
Yeah, and that coexistence really challenged me.
Yeah.
And so as I was reflecting upon that, it ultimately was the catalyst that led to Delaware.
Wow.
So the hospitality of the Syrian refugee that I experienced in Lebanon left an indelible mark on me. It was almost one of those surreal moments where you're in a tent community and they're welcoming you in. Then all of a sudden you find yourself in a refugee tent, and then they're serving you tea and having a conversation with you, and their hospitality, their culture is ever before you. And it just made me reflect and dream a bit about what Kansas City might be.
So Ryan, we use the term refugee in the vernacular a lot. Can you explain exactly what a refugee is and what resettlement is?
I know, the term is so important to understand.
Because it's not an immigrant.
No.
It's not someone seeking asylum. So these are all things that I think are very confusing.
It's very confusing, and we need to go back to 1951 to see when this term, at least for our nation, and the global infrastructure for resettlement really starts having more substance. Mm-hmm. So it was at the 1951 convention that they established international rights and protections for refugees, and then determined what a definition of refugee would be. Mm-hmm. So a refugee is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin because of a well-founded belief of persecution and due to specific causes, which is really important because there can be reasons for displacement outside of these specific causes. So a refugee has been displaced because of well-founded persecution due to race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or they're a member of some kind of social group that is receiving persecution. The language becomes particularly important because refugees will have different legal rights and different legal pathways compared to those others who are experiencing displacement, but not have been outside of the country of origin, who are not qualifying as a recognized people group that is being persecuted. And so we're thinking about the distinctions here. So a refugee will be outside their country of origin. So let's use a modern example to help reflect upon that. So in 2022, there was the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Those who are in Kyiv, which is closer to the eastern side and closer to the Russian border, if they stay within their country of origin, they are an internally displaced person, which is incredibly traumatic, and we shouldn't consider this a second tier because the trauma that exists for IDPs is incredible. But once you leave, because you've been persecuted, because of the outbreak of war, because of this nationality, once you're outside, then you are able to qualify for refugee status if you're deemed a group that qualifies for refugee status.
So once Ukrainians cross the border into Poland,
correct,
they would be granted refugee status.
As long as it's recognized
Nice.
by the United Nations High Commission of Refugees. And so let's put it
Oh, so there's a governing body then. Oh,
that will designate and help guide and provide an international infrastructure for determining, all right, what people groups are qualifying and then thus are eligible for resettlement. We need to contrast this with what happened in late 2021 in Afghanistan, where you had an emerging power from the Taliban who took over the country in the waning months of the summer of 2021. And all of a sudden we're having a number of Afghans who are fleeing because of the persecution that they will face due to Taliban takeover. Because they did not flee outside their country of origin, they are not technically considered refugees. Although for all intents and purposes we would say, my gosh, these people have experienced incredible displacement. They're losing their home, all of their property, their relationships, of course. They're having to flee. But because it was within the country of origin, the nature of their departure, they're not given refugee status, which has resulted in some legal questions that we are dependent upon the goodwill of Congress to determine and overcome in order to clarify legal pathways and legal rights for so many that we've received over the past year.
and another example of someone who is not a refugee would be those individuals from Central America who are fleeing. So they're fleeing their country because of gang violence, and they may appear at our borders, but they are not refugees.
So you were getting to asylees also.
So that's asylum seekers.
That's the asylum. And so those either from Mexico or across Central America,
Yeah.
which during the Trump administration, they actually put some emphasis on those who are emerging from the so-called Northern Triangle, which is El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, in order to recognize the refugee status, in order to reduce the pressure coming to the southern border. Now, all of this is not to understate the incredible trauma that's endured by those who are internally displaced, who are not receiving refugee status. So for your asylum cases, you will be eligible to receive asylum if you present yourself at a U.S. port or are in the United States and saying, I also have a well-founded reason for persecution due to this kind of class. So the asylum journey is one almost to say, I am deserving of refugee status as well, although I'm not necessarily a formally recognized class, and I am presenting myself for your assessment to see if I qualify in order to stay in the United States of America.
So Ryan, can you share some stories of what some of your clients have experienced before arriving in Kansas City, both within their country of origin, and I think you were sharing with me that some people end up displaced in refugee camps for extended periods of time, even years, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We know stories of families who have lived in refugee camps for decades. And so you think about what a refugee camp is. It's a place that has emerged as a, what I'll say, a quasi safe haven for those who are experiencing displacement. You lack major infrastructure, access to health care. So the fight for food and water is something that impacts your daily mentality. But I don't want to make it too monolithic, because we know other stories of refugees existing both in rural and other urban environments. And so the path for the displaced can be unique to each person. One of my colleagues and now dear friends, she experienced xenophobia and conflict twice. As a child, she lived in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but because of an outbreak of violence there, she and her family were forced to flee to South Africa. And she tried to integrate into the society, learn how to navigate, but she continued to experience xenophobia in South Africa as well. And so she was identified as a candidate for resettlement. Through this whole journey, so as a child, moving to South Africa, continuing to experience persecution, then resettled into the United States, and of course, Kansas City. During that time, she turned 18 years old. And when you're 18 years old, you're generally recognized as an adult. So she was resettled in isolation to her family, who has experienced the same kind of xenophobia. And only now has she been reunified with a couple family members, while the rest of her family waits to be resettled. And so the journey to the United States and the journey upon arriving in the United States, those are both very challenging times. And I think about the era following the arrival in Kansas City as a great potential for the second tragedy of resettlement. And that's when we leave our community, our new neighbors, in loneliness and isolation without actively having a relationship, overcoming linguistic barriers, and helping them navigate the city that they've arrived to. Because that trauma for our communal and collectivistic cultures of being isolated in the most heavily individualistic country in the world, that can lead to very dark places. So we can actively overcome that with strong relationship. So that's why I believe it is so critical for community stakeholders, community institutions to engage together to understand how do we offer pathways and access so that our newest neighbors and also all of our Kansas Cityans can have a relationship with us and thrive in our community.
Okay, so Ryan, how does someone get from the country that they're displaced out of to the United States?
Yes.
What is that process?
So let's look at, as of the end of 2021,
yes,
there was 89.3 million people who've experienced displacement.
89.3 million. Okay.
Across the globe. That does not necessarily mean that there's 89.3 million refugees as recognized by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. Of that 89.3, there's 27.1 million. So just to put it in perspective, since the 2000s, before COVID-19 and some administrative changes in policy, the United States was resettling between 60,000 to 90,000 per year. Currently, we have 27.1 million refugees across the globe. And so a resettlement is a very small part of the response to displacement across the globe. That needs to be recognized.
So what's the other response?
That is the great question. There are a number of countries, such as Turkey. Turkey has accepted the highest number of refugees from across the globe, and there will be wildly different takes from those in their countries about what the proper response is. Pressure on healthcare institutions and all public services, but then again, you have to consider what the incredible adds are to your community by having so many refugees with their giftedness contribute towards the well-being of your society. But Turkey is a primary country, with Venezuela and all that's happened with the instability there. There's a number of countries immediately surrounding Venezuela. In fact, per capita, Aruba is the largest receiver of refugees across the globe, just because it's such a small nation, but so many Venezuelans have traveled to Aruba. And so displacement has many forms, and it's always reflective of some of these major conflicts and instability that we see. And there will always be ripples beyond the immediate catalyst for displacement. And so, specific to Afghanistan, with Taliban takeover, for Afghan refugees, and now refugees, because many are leaving their borders in order to qualify for refugee status, they'll be coming to the United States for many years, much like we saw with Vietnam and the fall of Saigon in the mid-70s. For the next 2 decades, we were receiving those from called at that time Indochina, right? So from Vietnam, from Laos, Cambodia, and we've seen the great adds that those communities have added to our own community.
I remember that very well as a child, when Saigon fell and the number of Vietnamese families that came, and how they ended up being some of my best friends all the way from 3rd grade through the graduating high school.
That's so right.
How I'm still friends with them today.
And how they enriched your lives.
Absolutely.
And enrich our community.
Yeah.
Like, the historic Northeast, the Columbus Park area, of course, you have this rich Italian impact. You have Garozzo's right there. You get the chicken spadini. But then you also have the Vietnam Cafe. That doesn't exist if we don't accept refugees. And that has been a great addition to our city and has added so much to our city. But to your original question, 89.3 as of the end of 2021 were displaced people across the globe, which is an outdated statistic, by the way, because now we have Afghanistan and Ukraine to consider. But as of the end of 2021, 89.3 million, 27.1 million had received refugee status. And it will be the United Nations High Commission on Refugees that will do vetting of those who are qualifying for refugee status and determining if they're strong candidates for resettlement.
And that is that one by one, or is that as a group of displaced people?
United Nations High Commission will have offices located all across the globe that they will work with local resettlement camps and local individuals to identify those candidates who are eligible to be resettled. Now, resettlement, as we said, the United States has long been the leader in resettlement, and the numbers that we're receiving for those who are formerly resettled to a third country. It's the third pathway, because for those who are displaced, clearly they may want to return home first, so that would be the first. Maybe there's a trigger for displacement, but that won't last for an extended period of time, so those who are displaced hope to return home. The second option is assimilation into the neighboring country. So for instance, if you were displaced out of Venezuela and you traveled to Colombia for safety, you may choose to assimilate in that. And there can be strong reasons for that. There's no language barriers, you may be able to better understand and navigate the culture, and you may have a community there already to support you. But then there's the third option, which is resettlement, and that's when the United Nations High Commission works to identify those candidates who really, because of ongoing persecution, inability to assimilate, really identify those who are candidates for resettlement.
And are there a certain number of countries that are identified as being eligible to bring in people for resettlement?
Through the United Nations, but the top 5 countries, which includes the United States, Canada, Germany, they've represented of everyone, of 10 people resettled, 9 will be resettled in the top 5 nations who are actively receiving people. And the United States has been the leader of that for an extended period of time. So one reason, so how do you get to Kansas City?
Yeah, so you're sitting in your office in the historic Northeast.
There we are.
Does someone call and say, Ryan, we've got a family from...
Hey, you.
Yeah.
No, so once identified as a candidate for resettlement, there are 2 primary federal governmental institutions that will oversee the resettlement process. One is PRM, which is a function of the State Department, which will oversee the initial arrival process. Working with PRM is 9 quasi-governmental institutions that will receive an allocation of refugees each year, and then will determine the best location within their network to resettle. So let's get specifics, because that's all very confusing. So
and complicated and sounds quite bureaucratic, right? But when you're anything that's government and non-government and private sector, it's going to be complicated.
It is complicated, and we work through these processes. And so this, the 9 federal agencies, ours is known as the Ethiopian Community Development Council, celebrating its 40th year of service. It emerged 40 years ago in response to an advocate from Ethiopia who was reflecting upon the rights of refugees from across Africa, and saying there needs to be other representation and advocacy for those who are experiencing displacement across Africa. And so the Ethiopian Community Development Council, it first emerged as this real strong advocate, but now celebrates and supports refugees from across the globe, and is one of those 9 federal agencies. DELOAM is within their network. We are not a part of ECDC, but we are a local affiliate where we are contracted through ECDC to receive refugees. Much of the time, it will be rooted in relationship. Is there someone, either an existing family member, a friend,
So it's not random.
a former neighbor, most often. There are times where those are resettled in Kansas City who do not have an existing relationship, but this concept of a U.S. tie is important to determining who we're going to receive, what's the community support here in order to receive them and support them as part of their community integration journey. Since 2015, For Della Lamb specifically, the overwhelming majority, outside of last year when we were receiving a number of those evacuated from Afghanistan, are those who have been displaced outside the Democratic Republic of Congo. From 80 to 90% of the people that we've resettled have been displaced from the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
So through that effort, there has been the development of a community of people from the Democratic Republic of Congo here in Kansas City.
Certainly.
Amazing.
And just, one of those communities, you look for like-minded individuals to help you navigate your journey. And so Della Lamb over the past 6 months has been hosting a Congolese church on the weekends. And you get to hear their hymns and their songs and their shouts, praise, and you're thinking, this is enriching my community.
Right.
And so there's these communities that are forming and reflecting, how do we navigate this together? And that's when resettlement's done best, when it's done in relationship and in community.
So other refugees, are there still refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo? So those individuals would find a community here, so this would be a good place to. So you're still getting those calls for those?
Certainly, for those from the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Gotcha.
But it is diversifying in the number that we're receiving. It won't be 80 to 90%. Over the next several years, we'll continue to receive those from Afghanistan, because now there's a emerging Afghan community, and we'll see all their contributions to our city. The Rohingya population and different people groups in Myanmar, there's continued to be violence there, and that will continue to be a people group that needs resettlement. And so that's one of the beauties and also the challenges of resettlement, is that the volatility in displacement and the people groups who are needing to be welcomed. How do we understand and respond to each person's language, each person's cultural lens, so that we're really welcoming them in a way that fully sees their dignity and creates a comfortable environment for them to come into our city.
So is it mostly, it's families by and large, or individuals, or a combination of both?
Combination of both. So within this past month, we've received individual cases of one. We've received a single mother with a child. We received a family of 11. And so all of this, it just reflects the
child alone, 11.
We've received a child who had relationships here and is actually joining their biological family. They were separated. And so now this is a beautiful unification story. Finally, you're thinking about a mother and a father who've been separated from their child. Now we get to be part of that reunification. We have a family of 11 who is being resettled, and they'll be able to lean on each other as part of the resettlement process. It does not make it easy to find housing for a family of 11
people,
but they'll have their family here to support each other along their journey.
So you drive out to the brand new wonderful KCI airport, and then what? You pick up this family, or you pick up this individual, and do you have housing prepared?
The journey begins, and so one of our primary roles in those initial days is, prior to arrival, identify and furnish housing.
Okay. And where does that money come from?
What an interesting question. They say refugee resettlement is a public-private partnership.
Okay.
Which is a euphemism for underfunded.
Yeah.
Also reflections that we absolutely need. That if you try and do this in isolation outside of the community, it's going to lead to bad outcomes.
Right.
So we fundamentally have to work with different community stakeholders to identify home furnishings, identify good options for housing, which is really hard. Because housing, for instance, you think about the standard, I want to go rent an apartment. What are the standard checks I'm going to go through?
Right.
What's my employment history? What's my credit history? What do you do with someone who lacks both of those things? And so your pool of property managers immediately narrows.
Because these individuals are they eligible to work from when they arrive?
Not when they arrive. Well, I'll take that back. They have legal papers that allows them to right to work, but very shortly after, through the refugee process, they will receive their employer authorization documentation, and that is one of the second fundamental roles that we have as a resettlement agency. The concept or the infrastructure of refugee resettlement in the United States is very much built on this concept of self-sufficiency, which, in my opinion, takes on too much of an economic lens, although I understand the need for some of the economics to be part of the conversation. So it sprints towards the idea of getting those we're resettling off of public benefits. And we have highly entrepreneurial clients who are finding work sometimes within 60 days of arrival. So that is a second primary role that we have. How do we overcome, given the limited resources that we are given to support the family as part of their arrival, which as of today, for each person who comes through the formal refugee resettlement gateways, we get $1,075. And then depending upon enrollment in different programs, there may be other funding available to support each family. But this is 6 months at best. So if we are not finding employment, if we're not actively working to enroll in other benefits, 6 months, there's really a ticking clock for families once they arrive to identify jobs and to think about other benefits and finances to support them.
And I'm sure that for the majority of individuals who are being resettled, language is going to be an issue for employment.
It is. And so, I'm really appreciative of how you've identified that, because I think about those things. It's like, okay, these are some of our biggest opportunities.
Absolutely.
So, as we think about inclusion, as we think about meeting fundamental business needs, our refugees and immigrants have a part to play.
Yeah, I mean, think about you're resettling professionals, nurses, doctors, lawyers, tradespeople. I mean, the ability for them to support the communities that they resettle in.
And to give.
And give, absolutely.
So, there's studies done upon economic impact, public benefits given to refugees, but then the long-standing impact, just because of their contributions to the tax base, to the GDP, they far exceed those initial costs.
Sure. Makes sense.
So we have one new employer partner who, over the past 6 months, they were facing fundamental business challenges. Some of their statistics they were reflecting upon: 16% downtime in their operations and production because they were unable to staff it. One particular month, they hired 34 people and they experienced turnover of 34 people. So net zero gain in addressing fundamental business needs related to identifying employments. They were thinking, we have to come up with some different solutions. And so they connected with us, and we thought, how do we overcome some of the logistical needs, some of the language barriers that will exist to get our clients to contribute towards your success? Because they want to work, you want to pay high wages. How do we do this? So they've hired 87 of our clients, and not just our clients, but those from Catholic Charities and JVS, the other local resettlement agencies.
There's 3 of you.
There's 3 of us in Kansas City. And of those 87, they've lost 2 people. And they said, we completely understand the reasons as to why they're departing to address some of their family needs. Their downtime has decreased, and they're finding reliable and highly motivated employees. And so now they're thinking, how do we scale this? How do we expand this to other facilities across the country?
Yeah, and boy, healthcare is such a growing sector, and the needs for all level of healthcare personnel is just, I can just see all kinds of opportunities here.
If we just have the lens,
Absolutely.
that eyes to see, we can be heavily preventative in nature, address root causes that oftentimes that we don't get to understand because we lack relationship, and make for a richer community.
Let's shift a little to the healthcare needs of this community. The majority of people watching are my nursing colleagues or nursing students. So I'm sure that when the individuals arrive here, they have had maybe limited access to healthcare in the recent past. So how do you provide for that, or do you provide for it?
Yeah, no, it's an important part of the equation. I mean, healthcare in the United States is a complexity for so many to navigate.
It is, and there wouldn't be the only people without access to healthcare in our nation.
That's true. So, immediately upon arrival, you'll qualify for a year of medical assistance. There will be an initial health screening performed prior to arrival that gives limited details on what we can expect as the local resettlement agency and how we care for someone who is coming. So for instance, over the months of April and May, we will receive 4 of our clients who will require wheelchairs. So
Okay.
we get some of those initial details. Some of those things though, it's great ambiguity. What does it wheelchair exactly mean? What are the mobility challenges that someone is having
Quite
to...
a spectrum of wheelchairs that people need, and adaptive
Yes.
equipment on the wheelchair.
Exactly. So as we reflect upon that, there's always great questions. And for us, it immediately impacts housing. Is this person's mobility challenges impact, they need to be on the first floor or the second floor?
Can't get upstairs if you need a wheelchair.
Exactly. And so with that, there will be initial health screening. We'll perform another health screening within 30 days after arrival. Given some of the medical access, and now with the expansion of Medicare, some of our clients will qualify for Medicare. Others will find healthcare options through their employers. So that's an important part of the conversation too. But for those who are coming, can be long-standing medical conditions that have been unaddressed, nutritional deficiencies that have to be reflected upon, lack of ongoing assessment, dental needs. And so really identifying those options that are available to accept RMA, Refugee Medical Assistance, and then Medicare after that. That's what we're working to help our clients understand how to navigate.
And I'm assuming a great deal of mental health needs and support.
Yeah, it's really important that you're bringing this up. The access to mental health. We as a society are having a collective conversation about what does that mean? What does that look like? That really kind of helps us transition into how do we even think about what trauma-informed care is?
Yeah, I did want to talk about that. So first of all, define it for our colleagues watching, because it may be a new term
Yes.
for some people.
Yeah, and Della Lamb, we've really embraced this as part of our early education program, just as we reflect upon all the unique expressions of behavior that a child may have. And so I would offer 2 different questions as we reflect upon trauma-informed care. It's really, instead of going to, what's wrong with this person? To saying, what happened
to this person? It's the key, right?
And so much of how do we even define what trauma is? And what we now understand is that each person's distinctive personality, background, and experiences are shaping their emotional response to an incident or series of incidents. And it's guiding the way that they process this world. And so a trauma-informed lens is helping us reflect upon who is this person? Not simply as a component of veins and organs, but what is the full experience that has led this person to this moment here? And how do I understand them, understand what they're sharing, their behavior, and really come to their level and build trust so that we can work towards a good solution. And so for the early education model that we've really embraced here, it's reflecting upon what's called the ARC intervention model. It's quasi like Maslow's hierarchy, where you're addressing some of your basic and relational needs and then going more towards your self-fulfillment. But the ARC model stands for attachment. How do we form good relationships, which is at the root of trauma? How do we think about how do we build trust and friendship so that we can actively discuss and work together? Then trauma-informed care goes towards regulation or self-regulation. How do we equip someone to understand their own emotions, their own responses, and then affect that where they can modify that, where they understand, I'm not in a good place. I don't understand how I'm processing. Let me think about the environment that exists that allows me to come in fully. And then we get to the fuller place of competency, which is more of your self-actualization, identity, and fulfillment. So the trauma-informed lens is really looking at the individual uniquely, understanding that trauma has existed, but may manifest itself in a way that's unique to that person. So what is trauma-informed care? It's looking at both the individual and the environment holistically that will allow us to welcome, honor the dignity of someone, and be able to provide the best quality of care that we can. So as I think about a healthcare setting and some of the challenges and some of the people groups that we receive, let's go to birthing centers. Let's consider some of the cultural differences in the birthing process, where you might have, for good reasons, but a very sanitized environment that limits the number of people who will be with you at the time of birth. Contrast that with some of these rich, communal, collectivistic cultures where you are surrounded by female relatives and friends who are with you in the trenches, oftentimes in the home. So you pair those two experiences together, and you're thinking about the rich communal exercise here versus someone stepping into an environment where they have limited relationships, they have language barriers, they can't understand what's going on, and for many of them, this may be one of the most vulnerable moments of their life. And so let's pair that together and say, okay, how do we, understanding that there's real important needs to make sure that we are in a sanitized and safe environment, how do we educate so that those who are coming into that environment understand why we're doing what they're doing? But also, how do we embrace some of these strong principles, this communal richness, as part of what we do to make this an experience that is not going to re-traumatize or induce trauma. And so it's that kind of thoughts and lenses that all of us as community stakeholders, but those in healthcare institutions, really need to embrace. Because those who are engaging at your healthcare institutions, you're oftentimes in a state of vulnerability. You're processing something either physically, mentally, spiritually, and you're in a place where authenticity and relationship is so key in order to really addressing what the root causes are. However, if our environment and our system is structured where we can't offer those things, this can be a place where there's a fundamental disconnect, where we're not going to be able to connect, and we're not going to be able to address root causes that face so many of our different communities and our neighbors across Kansas City. So trauma-informed care requires deep humility, deep empathy, a deep passion for addressing and understanding how someone is navigating this world, and then responding in such a way that says, how do I help you have trust and relationship with us so that we can actively work together for the best outcome that's possible?
It's so important, Brian. Trauma-informed care, regardless of who you're working with, because you have no idea who has experienced trauma. And there is statistics that are alarming that 60% of the individuals we encounter, we can easily re-traumatize if we are not careful. And the whole idea of trauma-informed care is now being applied to, well, of course, primary education, even more so to now post-secondary education with trauma-informed teaching. Because what we can do in the classroom can be every bit as harmful as the things that you're talking about in terms of re-traumatizing in the clinical setting. So, and you described it so beautifully. Thank you. So, what is it you would like healthcare professionals who are taking care of the refugee community to know? What is the most important thing when you go in?
Fundamentally, relationship is exceptionally important. And we have a disconnect. We were, Del-Lam, in partnership with UMKC and the Health Forward Foundation, has been going through an exercise over the past year to reflect upon how different refugee and immigrant communities responded to COVID-19. How do we even reflect upon what they're seeing, what their experience is, to understand how to navigate healthcare institutions, understand mental health, and all the social emotional aspects that COVID-19 brought up in all of us. And the Guatemalan community was just so enlightening, because it really comes to bear on some of the cultural differences that we have and the opportunities we have to connect with those different members across the community. They reflected upon the absence of relationship with healthcare providers. They also reflected upon representation. It's like, we need someone from Guatemala who is a doctor to help meet my needs.
We forget how important that is.
And it's rooted in trust.
It is rooted in trust.
And relationship. And so it's that vulnerability that's so needed for healthcare institutions to actively meet the needs of those that they're striving to serve. And if we look at people as transactions, we're going to miss it. And we're also going to misdiagnose. And so having authentic relationship with those that we are striving to serve, I get it. There's language barriers. Technology has a role to play, but not a full role to play. Oftentimes, I hear those who are my team who is working with our clients, and then clients themselves who have some understanding of the language will say, those interpreters aren't fully representing what I'm sharing. And so it's this gap that exists that serves as a barrier for relationship. So we're in a real difficult spot because healthcare providers are feeling the stresses and the strains before COVID-19, but certainly following and part of COVID-19. But how do we create room for relationship and an infrastructure that really needs the work that you're doing to raise highly competent nurses to step in and help care for people?
Yeah, because without it, it is the most important buffer for stress. You know, if we do not build those relationships, whether with our coworkers as healthcare professionals or with our patients, with the interprofessional team, we're never going to come out on the other side of this, because this is the antidote for that stress. I don't see any other way through it. That's great.
That relationship is fundamental. So we have to think about how we invest in those relationships, not just with our clients, but with our community stakeholders and our community partners that help us navigate those relationships. So sadly, this whole initiative with UMKC and the Health Forward Foundation, we've reached out to a number of healthcare providers, and they're tapped out for busyness. And so the inability to invest in relationships with other lenses that help us understand our community reflects that often we're doing this in isolation. And yes, we're gathering information as we engage with our clients and having peripheral relationships with our stakeholders. But how our resettlement agencies aren't fundamental partners with all of our healthcare institutions to say, hey, by the way, this is some cultural competencies to help you understand how to connect with your client. These are language terms that our client doesn't understand because there can be a language barrier. And the thing I've come to appreciate with language is that shared words does not mean shared meaning. And so we have to overcome those differences in language that's not simply verbal, but is deeper within. And the resettlement agencies and other providers, if we operate in an isolated manner, then we're going to be doing our clients and our community a disservice, and we're not going to be proactively pursuing the best optimal health for our community.
And boy, everything you're saying is applicable to no matter who we're providing care for. I mean, I hate to say it, but even someone with privilege needs to be listened to, and let alone someone who has gone through like what your clients have gone through.
I think that you're pointing back, we're coming full circle here.
Yeah.
So well done. I think you're pointing back to, I fully believe that presence is transformational.
Yeah.
My presence, how I experienced the hospitality of the Syrian refugee, my time laughing with the Haitian orphan, whether it's an actual biological orphan or the term economic orphan, those who are experiencing institutional style living just because their parents want a better life for their children. It's that presence that proves transformational and reflects that we have this shared humanity where we want to be seen and known.
Absolutely.
And that's the richness of refugee resettlement. That we can see and that we can know each other. And that through that common thread of humanity, we can work together to make both of our lives richer because of the relationship that we have.
So many of the cultures that your clients are coming from, the gender roles and the status of women is very different than is in the United States. So talk a little bit about some of the complexities that occur when, especially women from another culture, where things are quite different, encounter either healthcare professionals or others in our U.S. culture.
Yeah, this directly goes back to our reflections upon trauma-informed care. Not just the direct interaction, but how do we create an environment that welcomes so many and does not induce trauma or re-traumatize. And so this past year, we've received so many from Afghanistan as a result of the Taliban takeover. We think about all of the unique medical needs that the Afghan women, which is almost too monolithic to say, because there's different pockets and people groups within Afghanistan that will have different proclivities in how they think about gender roles, how they interact with the different genders. So from the most conservative, though, their interactions, particularly in a highly vulnerable setting where you're talking about your physical body, you're having assessments done, this can become, if not outright borderline culturally offensive, if we're having males perform this assessment. And particularly if they don't have the understanding of that this is going to be such a sensitive area for someone who is engaging. And so gender roles and this broader cultural competency is so important in order to provide effective care. Because for I'm thinking about one of our clients who are in some of the most vulnerable periods of their life. During this past year, we had 9 Afghan women who gave birth. So we were watching and witnessing the coming of the newest Kansas Cityans right there, who have this now Afghan American story to tell.
And at home, these women would have probably been giving birth in their home, surrounded by their mothers and their aunts and so forth. All right, so now they're in this very medicalized, probably male-dominated birthing type of situation.
Which points to the importance of your work.
Yes.
And the importance of raising up those who can have trust and overcome those barriers for authentic relationship. And so as we think about trauma-informed care, as we think about cultural competency, the gender role cannot be overlooked because you're going to create a significant barrier. Also, you need to be able to have active relationships with the individual patient, as there will be other cultural barriers that they may or may not want to share in the presence of other people. And so making sure that we are creating pathways for active relationship cultivation is fundamental to providing sound healthcare.
Lots of different opportunities and lots of different ways and lots of different modalities, and even amongst different people, to ensure that you really are getting the best part of the story in order to deliver the care in the most appropriate way.
That's right.
And it's probably not as simple as we teach it, where you go in and do a health assessment and ask what your preferences are.
That is absolutely right. Because, it's like, let's do a survey.
Absolutely.
A survey is very transactional.
Yeah.
You give me information, I give an output here with the response. It's that relationship's that key. And so in the absence of being able to identify a Pashto speaking doctor who is female, who can care for all of those who have come with that tribal influence from Afghanistan.
And does that person exist in Kansas City?
Certainly now.
Okay.
Part of those coming from Afghanistan, they're really from 4 people groups that we received. It's the Hazaras, the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, and the Pashto. And so for those who are speaking a unique language, have a unique sense of the world, how do we create trust? So if we're not going to identify a doctor who can step into that role, how do we have other cultural partners that help us navigate that, create relationship with that, help the doctor understand that? Because I imagine that doctors and nurses, they're filled with so much in their day. So how do we create space where that becomes a natural expression of our care by inviting other different cultural voices into the process of cultivating that trust and then thus delivering more effective care?
Right. And that's true whether you're dealing with someone from the refugee community or someone from another racial community, someone from another ethnic background. So it really is a model in which probably competent care has to be delivered.
That's right. I think
It's relationship based.
it is. That's the heartbeat of it.
And we try to do that so much in nursing. I mean, it should be at the heart of
Yes.
what we do. And we talk a lot about nursing presence and the transformative nature of nursing presence. I know you used that earlier. It's so hard to forget about it and lose that when, what I say, the stuff, and the stuff is important. The stuff may be, an arrhythmia or an infection or a physical trauma or simply the need to get to 5 or 6 patients. But I've contend that you're not really nursing unless you're doing it in that person-centered, relationship-related, authentic way.
That's it.
Because you're not going to transform someone through the work of your hands. You're going to transform someone through the work of your heart and through the relationship.
I think there is fundamental opportunity for our healthcare institutions across Kansas City to reflect upon how they adapt their care to specific people groups.
Yeah.
And not even specializing on all of them as one, but others specializing in different people groups to deliver effective care. And think about how rich that would be then if the different people of our community had a sound understanding of an institution that says, I see you and I want to know you.
Yeah. This came to light or to heart to me with a group of our students who came to me and said, 4 brilliant students, they are all African American women, and they said, one of the things we want to do is be the ambassadors from our community to our other students because they're getting it wrong. Or they're not appreciating it, or they're not understanding the lived experience of what's happening. And you're right, that is really important no matter what, no matter where you're coming from.
We want to be seen.
Yeah.
We want to be heard. It's fundamental. So as we do the long-term work of investing in the different communities to identify those who can serve in these roles, we need to think about how we are inviting other voices into our work, not as an add-on, but as an integrated, central piece of what we do.
Yeah. You do have to have that person.
And it will lead to better care. When you think about African American women, the mortality rate that some have experienced, particularly as in giving birth, it just reflects that
It's the highest in the developed world in our country.
we have work to do then.
Yeah.
We have work to understand, to reflect. What are we missing? Because we are missing. How do we engage? How do we invite the voice in? And then also, how do we cultivate culturally competent providers? Yes, members from the community, but others as well who can understand that trauma-informed care model, which is basically an admission that's saying, we all have trauma. We've all endured. And yours may impact you differently than mine impacts me.
Yeah.
But I see you, and I want to understand how to provide best care.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you
so much for coming. Thank you for being such a wonderful teacher to all of us. I learned so much today. I learned so much the last time we talked, and I really am grateful that there are people like you in this world who are doing the type of work that you do. You inspire me, and I'm sure you inspire so many who are who have tuned in today. And I thank all of you for joining us today. We look forward to continuing this series, and we will do so next month. And thank you all, and have a great day.